please put it together for John Rothmann, everyone. Come on.
Hi. Good to be with you. And Mark, please give your father my warmest good wishes. Everybody should know that your father's book on impeachment remains a classic, and I was honored to have him on my show during the height of the impeachment mania.
Yeah, it was a great thing to hear him with you. He's a great guy to kick stuff around with, but so are you. And I can start with the flashiest thing, and that's what I'm going to do, and then I'm going to get into. We can kind of skim along and hit stuff here and there, and of course, speak out whatever you'd like, John Rothman. But by the way, smash the like button for John Rothman. I want to ask you about the addition of Nikki Haley to the GOP race for president.
No surprise. She just wrote another book. She's been promoting it. The interesting thing is that she called Donald Trump before her announcement, and Donald Trump gave her a green light and said, if you want to run, welcome. Although there's no doubt that he views her as a bit of a traitor. You've no doubt heard the clip where she says, I wouldn't run against him under any circumstances, which just goes to show you love war and politics. All bets are off. Will she be a formidable candidate? Two-term governor of South Carolina, ambassador to the United Nations, very successful rhetorically as ambassador to the United Nations. She does have a following. I can't tell you whether or not she will achieve much, but I can tell you this. She is firmly on the right of the Republican Party. She clearly opposes a woman's right to choose. She's big on the whole thing about critical race theory, all of those things. Actually, Ron DeSantis, who is a serious candidate and who I think would be absolutely a horrible face for the Republican Party, she would be sort of DeSantis light. And if he were the nominee, it might be interesting to see a ticket that included DeSantis and Nikki Haley. And if you ask, aren't they too close together regionally? Just remember Clinton and Gore.
Let me ask you though, just when you say DeSantis light, what makes her? Why do you throw the light in? You don't think she's quite as heavy-handed on some of these things?
Exactly. Precisely. You hit the nail on the head.
Okay. So as that continues to percolate, you have the House now run by, it would seem, Kevin McCarthy is hostage to the more radical voices in the GOP. This debt ceiling, which is oftentimes used as a big game of chicken to get various concessions. I reminded everybody yesterday that we're talking about approving a debt ceiling and increasing a debt ceiling for money that's already been spent. It's already been approved. So this idea somehow that, you're arguing about this, I think this is a messaging loss on the part, in this case, of the Democrats in the White House. Hey, guys, you already spent this money. If you want to reduce spending for the future, you do it. You're in charge of the House now. You're in charge of appropriations. Great, do it. But this money's already spent. So let's raise the limit so we can pay the debt.
Listen, you're actually right on the money. It's very interesting because essentially what the Democrats are saying to the Republicans is, give us your budget. That's what Joe Biden is saying to McCarthy. Give us your budget. Let's take a look. McCarthy keeps talking about cutting fat. It just doesn't fly. And we'll soon find that out. You'll notice how quickly the Republicans retreated from the position that they might want to cut Social Security and Medicare. No surprise there, because anybody who touches that, it's big trouble. So what McCarthy's struggle is, and this goes to the whole Santos business, is that he only has a 4-vote majority in the House of Representatives. He's got to hold everything together. He is not doing very well at this moment, and you're going to see it all blow up over this question of raising the debt ceiling.
Smash the like button for John Rothman, the sexy fool, joins us on Wednesday, and we love it
with your iron rod.
Damn straight. Now, John,
I want to know, how's my hair?
You look great, baby. You are so handsome. I want to ask you about something. Now, I want to get into the international geopolitics. In Ukraine, it strikes me that things are problematic from new perspectives, and here's what I mean. And I'm curious your take, obviously. So we're sending tanks. There was tremendous pressure on the Germans to send tanks, and finally they relented, they now say that they are going to send them. So there's a new bunch of armaments being sent, but a new kind of armaments, and now you're seeing Ukraine asking for, but being turned down on. They really were rebuffed in their request for air support, to actually have aircraft supplied by the West. Do you see this as an escalating situation? I wonder if you can.
Of course, it's escalating. And the real issue here is the question of the nuclear issue, because both Medvedev and Putin yesterday in an interview indicated that the nuclear option is not off the table. Why do you think the Europeans are so concerned? I just talked with a very good friend of mine in Germany. He called me yesterday. We had a long talk, and he said, we're very worried about the instability in Russia, and we're very concerned about this talk of a nuclear war. And I have to tell you, that is the issue. And here's the question for Joe Biden, who has done a magnificent job of pulling together NATO. By the way, not just because he did a great job, but because people of NATO are afraid of Russia. So those motivations, now the question becomes, how far will NATO, how far will the United States go? And the normal question is, what will the United States do? One thing I can guarantee you, the United States will do nothing without all of our NATO allies with us, meaning there will have to be that. And if you listened last night on CNN, they did an hour-long interview with Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, who has been very interesting in his relationship to all of this. He was asked, would you be a mediator? Because he has the trust of Putin and of Zelensky. And the answer is, if the circumstances were right. He said, I have my plate full here, but yes. But the problem is there's nothing to mediate. That's the issue. And so it's going to be a very tough time. One other quick point. It is not the winter, which is now in its depth, that I'm worried about. It's the spring. Will there be a spring offensive? And what does that spring offensive bring? And what will it mean?
John, do you think we should begin to look at Ukraine as a sort of Afghanistan, as we shovel tons of money, armaments, and a kind of continue this protracted confrontation, even though, yes, it is escalating in all the ways that you detailed so well, I thought, just a moment ago. And we're flirting with some of those really, the specter of nuclear war is a serious one that I thought you also are so right to touch on. But I guess what I'm asking you is, without some kind of mediation, that's what made me think of it when you referenced that, without some kind of willingness to sit down, aren't we looking at a protracted conflict? How long could it go on? What's your sense of all of that?
Okay, Ukraine is not Afghanistan. Afghanistan was not a real country. There was no real army. We were propping them up with everything. We were pouring billions of dollars in. Those of us who have been commenting on it for a long time said, this is a paper tiger. It will all collapse if we pull out. And I believe that then, and obviously that's what happened. Ukraine is very different. The Ukrainian people are fighting on their own territory. They've won many victories in terms of battlefield, but also in terms of international politics. Zelensky has become a living symbol. Whether you agree with everything Zelensky does, remember, he has a very corrupt government. We've just heard about resignations and firings and involved with internal politics, which most Americans and Europeans have very little knowledge of. But it's a big difference between what happened in Afghanistan and what happened and what is happening now in Ukraine. So I see the difference. How long will we support Ukraine? Let me be blunt. As long as our allies feel threatened, and I speak particularly of the Western Europeans, but also Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania, Poland, Hungary, if they feel threatened, we are going to be right there, because that's what we have to do.
You know, John, and you're such a great student of history, you're so aware of the fact that wars and battles are fought over only one thing effectively, and that's territory. If you can capture territory through military means, you're able to maintain it through military means. After that, you can't bomb people into some political philosophy or religious philosophy or all the rest. It's thought then that, and I know this is really the conversation in Russia from those who are trying to prevail upon the West, to, don't you have to understand, we're not trying to take over this territory to make it Russian. we're trying to take back this territory, essentially to have a sort of Belarus kind of setup. We want a Russian. We're worried about the West taking over this territory from the standpoint of its closeness to NATO and ultimately being absorbed by NATO, even though NATO turned down Ukraine. I wonder if you can speak to what Russia wants to get out of it, because they're essentially laying waste to this country.
Okay, first of all, Mark, Vladimir Putin is the issue. Putin is the one who provoked the war. Putin is the one who is provoking all of this. And if Putin vanished tomorrow, the question would be, what would Russia do? The real issue is someone who was a student of the Soviet Union and studied in Russia. I was there during those days. I can tell you I understood or could analyze how the Politburo of the old Soviet Union worked. I have no idea who would succeed Vladimir Putin if Vladimir Putin were for some reason to lose power. The instability there is critical. But if Putin were to go one way or the other, the whole nature of the conflict would change. In the meantime, we have to be concerned about territory. And what the Europeans and the Latvians and Estonians and Lithuanians are concerned about is that Russia will extend the war into their territory. They were part of the Soviet Union. They understand the brutality of that way of doing things. So that, to me, is the real issue. And what we have to do now is give the Ukrainians everything they need. You know what Winston Churchill said? Give us the tools, we'll finish the job. And I think that is the Ukrainian attitude. Give us the tools. The nuclear thing, which I mentioned and which you kindly referred to as well, is the critical issue. There is a nuclear power plant. It is the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. If it becomes disabled, or if somehow nuclear weapons were used, the whole nature of the conflict would change. You'll notice the atomic scientists who do the nuclear clock have now moved the hands of that clock up to near midnight.
Tick, tick,
they
tick.
understand exactly. They understand the instability of Vladimir Putin. When everything hinges on one person's personality, when there is not a team in place, the whole thing changes.
Did you have anything for? I feel like I'm dominating things, Kim. You're allowed to throw in with Brother Rothmann as well.
Well, because you're sitting there in Washington D.C. and I don't know how far you are from the Capitol, but I just wanted to talk about a story I saw yesterday, Mr. Rothmann, regarding the Congress and a 200-year-old promise that we would have someone from a Native American tribe sit in the House, and that has never happened, but it might now.
Well, there's precedent for it. Take a look at Guam. They have a representative in Congress who is non-voting. The District of Columbia has such a figure in the United States Senate who doesn't vote, but is theoretically the representative. It's possible. I wouldn't hold my breath if I were you. Remember that First Nation people are not unified. That is to say, there are many tribes, many people who would have to have representation. It's a whole different bag of beans. But to be blunt with you, if we can do it for Guam, why can't we do it for our own indigenous people?
Yet letting down our own indigenous people and going back on our word is pretty much, that's USA number one, isn't it, John? That's what we do. It
certainly is. I did a course on broken treaties, America's broken treaties, and Native Americans are right there. Although you understand that's part of the problem with the world. One of the best classes I ever taught was one on broken treaties in the 20th century. Just go back and take a look at all the treaties that have been violated by people all over the world, and you read the rhetoric that went along with it, and it makes you wonder why sign any document at all.
I'm sick that I missed that class. I would have loved it. You should teach it again, and I will join via Zoom or whatever other virtual way. I think that's a great class. It sounds fascinating.
Maybe we can do a broken treaty segment here on the Mark Thompson Show. A different treaty every week.
Well, I've mentioned, one of the if you want to see it.
May I just point out, this is the 50th year plus a couple of months of the signing of the so-called peace with honor agreement with the Vietnamese. And you'll notice how long that lasted. I only point that out because it is an anniversary which was not marked this year. But in January of 1973, exactly 50 years ago, a number of things happened. One of them was the peace with honor, which was neither peace nor honor. The other was the death of Lyndon B. Johnson. I mean, there are many things And I always think of this historically in that context. I just thought I'd point it out because when you talk about Afghanistan, remember, many of us said the same thing about Vietnam. As soon as we pulled the plug on Vietnam, we knew everything was going to implode, and that's exactly what happened.
Well, John, you don't think we should have stayed in Vietnam?
I certainly don't. And I certainly think the interesting thing is, as many of you are aware, had certain policies been followed, we would have been out of Vietnam much sooner than we were. You know, if Harry Truman had lived, he was planning to meet with Ho Chi Minh. And imagine how different the world would have been.
Right. And, you know, just because we're on Vietnam, let me just run it out. The Vietnam, as you look at, you can listen to recordings and you can read chapter and verse and take John Rothmann classes on Vietnam and see how the American government knew, the president knew that this was an awful quagmire, and they remained in Vietnam for political reasons, and the Vietnam War continued for all the reasons that had nothing to do with anything virtuous and righteous.
You know,
and it cost tens of thousands of lives.
And there's a fascinating recording. You can Google it as soon as Mark Thompson's program is finished. You can Google the discussion between Richard Russell and Lyndon Johnson in 1965. And Johnson said to Senator Russell, who was one of his mentors, "I can't win and I can't get out. What should I do?" And that was in 1965.
And, you know, that's why the Afghanistan papers, this is instructive. This isn't just a history class. This is instructive to today. The Afghanistan papers detailed how the essentially same dance was being done by different administrations around Afghanistan, with not as great a loss of life, but with all of this money going over there. And then, of course, Iraq, where there was loss of life, tremendous loss of life on the Iraqi side, loss of life on our side as well, and all this money going out, and also a destabilizing effort in the Middle East. It was it's one horror show after another, and these dances are all so similar. You know, it's as though we forget our history.
I agree. No question about it. I wanted to say a word, if I can, because a funeral is taking place now, I believe, in this tragic killing, and that's all you can call it, police violence. Yeah. But I want to point out that the Vice President, Kamala Harris, is representing the United States there, and I know you wanted to raise this as well. Vice presidents traditionally go to funerals. They've been doing it for years. That's one of the functions of the vice presidency. We will see the impact in terms of all of that, but I will tell you that Fox, which I listen to, as you know, I suffer from low blood pressure, so when I need a little stimulation, they've been blasting Kamala Harris every minute, every day. And so I received an email asking me, what did I think the future of Kamala Harris is? If Joe Biden is nominated for another term, she will be his running mate. If he chooses not to run, she will stand as a candidate. If she succeeds to the presidency under any circumstance before 2024, she will be nominated by the Democrats and be the incumbent. And let me remind everybody that when Truman took over, nobody really knew who Truman was on April 12th, 1945. They used to say to err is Truman. So he had a very low acceptance rate. Kamala Harris, were she to be president, would be a commanding figure in so many ways. So I would not rule her out, nor do I think she is diminished. There's no way for a vice president to be successful. Really and truly, I could do a comedy routine about vice presidents. You know the story, Mark and Kim, of the mother who had two sons. They both went to sea. One went to sea and the other became vice president, and neither one was ever heard from again. That to me, John Nance Garner, one of my favorite vice presidents, once said the vice presidency isn't worth a bucket of warm, well, I've got to clean it up here. Spit, they said, but it was piss.
Yeah, I mean, no, I mean, I think that you of course you make the right points about the vice presidency and about essentially you get dumped into all these situations that are intractable. I mean, to send Kamala Harris to the southern border or to the Central America, to deal with these are problems that have been plaguing this country for decades, and all of a sudden you dump them on the desk of Kamala Harris. And that's
Joe Biden, having been vice president, should have known better. I used to write a column for the Quail Quarterly. That was the publication about Dan Quayle. And all I can tell you is when you think back and you reflect on Quayle, who was a creditable member of the U.S. Senate, became vice president, became a national joke. We used to say that the thought of Dan Quayle as vice president, we would quail at the thought.
Well, you know, it's funny because I'm in my mom's house, so let me mom and dad's house. During the time, so one of the things about being in Washington is that I went to school with a lot of people who are very high profile. They're kids, okay? And my mom, who's an educator, she taught a lot of those kids, okay? So during the Dan Quayle time that you're talking about, she would call me and she'd go, Mark, I just feel the press is being so unkind. I have the little Quayle children in my class, and they're just so unkind, Mark. Is there anything you can do? It was so sweet, you know, because she sees the human side of this family, you know. John Rothmann, I don't know that I agree with you on Kamala Harris. I think that she doesn't have, I get, you know, you've made the point so effectively. So I'll say this, and I'll also just accede to what you're suggesting. She doesn't have national heft. She has national problems. I think she has some, you know, and maybe, as you said, the flames of her problems have been fanned by Fox News Channel. But that said, and right-wing media, that said, it didn't even feel as though when she was standing on that stage with all those other Democratic candidates, when she was in the primaries, that she had national heft that did her much good. It's hard for me to see her actually making a successful run for the presidency. Now,
Mark,
you also had interesting narratives by which she could end up president. That's a different deal.
Mark,
I thought that's a really cool thought that honestly I didn't even think of, you know.
do you remember a national news magazine with George Bush on the cover, and the title was The Wimp Factor?
Right.
When you're in the White House, when you're in that position, theoretically, you rise to the occasion. And more than that, you get a break. When you're vice president, you don't get a break. You're the vice president. And I always think of the Wimp Factor. And I always think, by the way, of Joe Biden. Remember when he ran for president for the third time and stood on that debate stage with Barack Obama? He was a joke. He didn't achieve. But in the end, he became president. And whatever you think of Joe Biden, his record as president has been quite remarkable and really something. So who knows? Time will tell. And Mark, you and I will still be here talking about it, I hope.
I sure hope so, pal. So great. Ladies and gentlemen, smash the like button for a guy who joins us on Wednesdays now pretty regularly.
And it's with your iron rod.
Great to see that sexy beast that is John Rothmann. John, we love you. Thank you. John Rothmann, everybody.
Thank you, Kim, who did a great job in your absence. Kim,
yeah, she's great.
Thank you.
Kim is awesome.
So nice to me.
All right. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.